Europe as, somehow in between this very difficult economic situation between the two. And then once I do that, I look at EU-China as a potential bloc. How can we withstand the US pressure? Because we also have US pressure. It's not only China. Maybe it's more veiled and less apparent, but it's still there. So on the first point, US objectives, I think our reading of what the US is really trying to do after all of these measures is really to contain China. And I don't think we can talk about trade deficit when the US has actually imposed tariffs on issues on goods that China does not export to the US. So it's very, very obvious that the US is trying to target the upper end of the value chain, which China is already producing, maybe not necessarily exporting to the US, but clearly intends to produce even more with this China manufacturing 2025. So that's the US objective. I would also argue that with the incoming 200 billion package of additional import tariffs on China, the second objective, which is also related, but interestingly somewhat different, is to reshore away from China, or to re-offshore elsewhere, not China. And I can think of Vietnam, I can think of Mexico, the actual renegotiation of the bilateral agreement with Mexico is kind of interesting nowadays. How come that happened after we thought it would not happen? And I think it's happening because the US is trying to find other sourcing venues other than China to depend less on China, even for its imports of production. So it's not only stopping China on the upper end of this value chain, but also kind of depending less on China on the low end of the value chain. So this, if I were China, I would also be kind of worried about this, because these are two key issues for China today, and for any country that is trying to become an hegemon. So China's reaction. So how would you react to this? I guess the kind of the immediate reaction would be, I'm going to do exactly the same. And at the beginning of the first list that China put up, the 50 billion first list, there was a little bit of that. You stop aircraft that I'm not even exporting to you, I export your aircraft. And I think there's a Boeing representative here, I just checked the list. But they finally did not. They finally excluded aircraft. The Chinese, they finally excluded even semiconductors, rightly so. Rightly so. Today, China actually imports in value more semiconductors than oil, which really means that China needs those semiconductors to move up the ladder until it can produce them itself. So in a way, China, I think, with the benefit of hindsight, there was couple of months to think about this properly, with the visits back and forth. So, wait a minute, this is a trap. I should actually even think faster, move even faster towards my ultimate goal, which is moving up the ladder. And I'm not going to impose tariffs on myself, because I still need these products, rightly so. But this does not dispel the risk, because the target is there. The world has changed, in other words. It's like suddenly the US has woken up to this reality. And yes, China can make it cheaper to import, but eventually it could even be unable to import these semiconductors. We don't really know, because this is a chess game. And I like the expression, this is a chess game. When the US sees how China is reacting, it will now react in a different way to ultimately achieve its goal, which is containing China, moving up the ladder. And thus, I think, in a way, I'm not arguing that China doesn't have any other ways to react to the US, but trade-wise, I do think that there is very little that China can do. China, though, can, and this comes to my third point, Europe, can certainly speed up its acquisition of technology. And that's where Europe comes to the forefront. I can't but share the data that was unveiled as to how much China's investment in the US has been reduced, especially in industrial technology. There's not, we looked at M&A data, and I think one more Bruegel fellow, Jiao Shu, who is working intensively on M&A data and is looking at us now in our live stream, told me, I can't find a single transaction of M&A transaction of Chinese process of industrial technology in the US in 2017, as bad as that. And I can actually find hundreds of them in Europe. Hundreds of them. I mean, it's basically, if you exclude the UK, most of the acquisitions that China has conducted in Europe in 2017 are industrial technology. So we are the sourcing venue for China's, kind of making it a little bit, sound a little bit maybe dramatic, but you know, I'm trying to raise the understanding that we are the sourcing venue for China's manufacturing 2025, at least in some sectors. And is this good or bad for Europe? Maybe eventually, if we come up with something that is agreeable both for China and Europe regarding this massive challenge, which is the current US administration. I'm not saying it isn't, but we need, as Europeans, we need to be aware. We need to be aware of what's happening. So Europe stands right there. Europe stands in this idea that on the investment side, we're reducing our investment into China. Reluctantly, unreluctantly, it's very hard to judge. Is it because of barriers? Is it because we have less muscle to invest? You know, it's an open question. I do not want to put all of the burden on our Chinese colleagues, but this is a reality. Let alone the fact that the stock of FDI in China is very small compared to the US. So we are trapped in a massive investment over decades that we've conducted in the US, as opposed to a small investment and increasingly less that we have in China. And on the other hand, as regards trade, we are kind of reluctantly but interestingly in the midst of this trade war, which of course is not good for anybody like Europe, or massive trade surplus, but could be good for some sectors if we can step in things that the US will no longer export to China, or the other way around. But very importantly, to understand Europe's response, and I'm not going to talk about the transatlantic alliance or our historical alliance, I'm going to talk about business here. We export so much more to the US. It's not only the stock of investment that may delay or may make us hesitate about our support. It's really about the flow. We export much more to the US than to China. And I think the question for China then is, I certainly meet Alice, we do too. No worries, you're not alone on this one. But if China really needs alliances, the question is, and this is a little bit maybe controversial, but I want to say, shouldn't China have been more, quote unquote, generous before on its opening? Because now it's very hard. The stock of investment is right there, and it doesn't pay off for us to challenge the US. This is the key message. Europe, we like it or not, I understand that China will be the largest market in the world. I understand that very well. I live in Hong Kong, so I don't need to be convinced about this one. But the stock matters. The stock matters, and stock-wise, it's very costly for Europe to move, to even contemplate the idea of not following the US if push comes to shove. And push will come to shove because this is the US strategy to contain China. It's a structural strategy. I don't think this is a midterm election issue. So now, I truly believe that for China to have more of a chance to bring Europe closer, I wouldn't say all the way, but closer, at least not to avoid that alliance, I think China really needs to open up. It's not about convincing arguments that we may have had for many years in Europe, and I understand those arguments. But it's not about that. It's about a strategic decision that will help Europe align. And now we can go to what is needed, which is the last point. How can Europe and China align? Or not to the extent of perhaps expecting Europe to ever, forget about the US. That's very difficult for Europe, but at least to play more of a kind of ambivalent role that it may play otherwise. Well, I think for that matter, what really needs to be understood is how to entice European businesses' interest in China. After years of disenchantment, and it's not me saying that, it's the European Chamber saying that, whether right or wrong, in a way, doesn't really matter too much at this point in time. It doesn't really matter too much. I think it's important to read what were the concerns and see whether these concerns can be, to some extent, addressed. And of course, as Europeans, maybe we also have to learn from China's policies, in as far as we may have been lacking some of those policies because of our very strong alliance with the US. And I can think of industrial policy in Europe, which we have to revisit. But I'm going to focus, I'm not a European expert, I'm going to focus on what China could do. And again, not saying that Europe can't do anything. And if I just think of the two obvious measures, one is of course market access. So market access means that European companies, either through trade or investment, can reap more gains in China. And we could think, the unthinkable. I say the unthinkable because we've worked on a report for a long time discussing bilateral investment agreement, free trade agreement, But the point is, market access seems to be blocked after all of those discussions we had by the fact that we do not seem to agree on what economic model would be behind those trade and investment relations. So it's not only market access doesn't seem to be enough, because even in sectors where we do have market access, it doesn't seem to be happening. So what is behind that lack of interest, in other words? And I give one very important example. China finally, I've been following this topic for so many years, I was so proud when I saw the communique that China now allows for 51, i.e. control of a financial institution, a bank in China, which, it's been so decades that the world has been waiting for this, and now it's announced 2 weeks ago. So how come there's been no reaction on this humongous measure? How come? It's because the world is not really fully believing, and I'm talking about Europe now, that this is real. And if that's the case, it's very worrisome. Because even if you take decisions, the second one you took, which is also very important, I do believe that there was a lot of US pressure on this one, is to make it easier for foreigners to acquire companies on your stock market. Yeah? So that's a second big one that you have announced. With hardly any media coverage. I mean, how come? Before, this would have been humongous measures. Everybody would have been, cheering China for them. How come? So I guess there is part of a credibility story, I'm afraid. And second, there's also the idea. This is my last point and most important point, because it was widely discussed before on the actual economic model, where the ownership of production comes to the forefront. So I think as Europeans, it's hard to argue that the state doesn't play a role in Europe. Of course, in the provision of services, i.e. whatever is called welfare state in our. So, we understand that part. But China's role of the state is more on the provision of goods, on the actual production of goods and services perhaps, but meaning it's the supply side, yeah? It's a very different model, which, by the way, some European countries, and I know that you did some research on this, actually had in the past, but do not have anymore in the way we see it in China. Now, I can understand that there's many ways to look at the role of SOEs in China. We heard a few things about mixed ownership, which is interesting, but for us, I'm going to give you just a number of why it's so hard for you to understand your wording of mixed ownership. If you look at any of these companies that were referred as mixed ownership, Sinopec, the float of Sinopec in the stock market is 6.9%. Électricité de France, EDF, is 29%. But we think EDF is a state-owned company. This is the problem. For us, if you only list 6.9%, that's a state-owned company. And I think there's a lot of, we're so far apart in what we think is a state-owned company to what you think is a state-owned company that it's very hard to have a dialogue. Not that we don't believe your figures, of course we do, your economy is so much better than we do, but we just don't speak the same language on this topic. And I think this is extremely important. Of course, you may say we don't have subsidies. Maybe not directly, but I was trying to calculate the interest burden of a state-owned company as opposed to a private company in China for the same level of leverage. So it's literally 25% cheaper to borrow. And now this brings me to the banking sector. Yeah? If you look at state-owned banks, out of which ICBC, as an example, 6.9% float only. Again, so for us, this is a state-owned bank. No matter how we can't avoid thinking about it as a state-owned bank. So if we sum all of those state-owned banks, let alone other joint stock commercial banks, whose float is also well below control, meaning they're still controlled by local governments, it's virtually most of the banking sector in China, more than 80%. So, of course, it's easier to get credit. I am not judging the subsidies because it would be a long story, but I'm just saying, with such state-owned companies are 2/3 of listed companies, and I agree that maybe the employment is less, or the industrial sector is less, but I'm saying, for us European, it's a very state-owned driven, if not dominated, production model, not welfare, production. So if you ask a European company, would you operate there? It's not only about market access, it's what I'm going to do there. Will I have any chance? And this is the ultimate key point, in my opinion, to discuss. Because it would be very arrogant for Europeans to try to change your economic model. I think this is not the discussion, should not be the discussion. But the question is how to accommodate that equal footing, how to make it feasible so that Europe sees the benefits of this, I wouldn't say full alliance, because frankly I think it's going to be, but at least not going all the way to an alliance Europe that would be extremely dangerous, not only for China, for the world, because that's the wrong alliance, I think, for Europeans in the state of the world we find ourselves today. So I will leave it there. I think the whole idea is how to come up with a solution that is agreeable so that Europe sees more of those benefits that unfortunately are hard to see today because of fear of this model. Maybe we should know more, I agree, but beyond knowledge, I think we should also have some kind of more secure environment to what we see without expecting to change your model, which is of course the one you have chosen. We have no right to do that. But I think this is where the two things clash, and it's so important for Europe and China to discuss this. I would say, it's of the essence to discuss it as soon as possible, because we cannot, and this is my last word, we cannot expect multilateralism to come back out of nowhere and basically save us all, or save us some, Europe and China. I don't think it's going to happen, so we need to move fast in trying to solve this dilemma of our economic models. Thank you. Thank you.